Some selves appear the way waves appear, not as separate things, as shapes the whole makes visible for a while. A wave is not apart from the ocean, but it is not nothing. It rises, it holds an edge. The edge appears as if it contained something that belonged only to itself, as if the shape were a second substance inside the first. It becomes visible because the water has taken a form. The voice is not the object. The object is the boundary the voice pointed toward. The archive does not follow the speaker. It follows the shape left visible when the speaker is no longer required to explain the water. The archive begins at that boundary. The surface of the ocean is moving, not toward any shore. There is no shore visible at this hour, no edge in any direction, only dark water extending to where it meets dark sky, at a line that is not a line, but a condition of visibility. The surface is moving. Not all of it in the same direction, not all of it at the same rate. Each point on the surface is doing what the water below it is doing, and what the water below that is doing, and what the energy that entered this body of water at another location has been doing since it entered. A shape rises. It is not a separate thing. It is not water that has decided to move while the water around it stays still. It is the surface taking a form. The water at the crest displaced upward by what arrives from below. The water on the advancing side drawn into the shape the arriving energy requires. The water on the trailing side released back toward the level the surrounding ocean holds. The shape moves across the surface. The water does not. The water did not choose to become a wave. The energy arrived at the surface. The water took the form the energy required. No part of the ocean gathered itself into a shape and departed. No part decided to separate from the rest. The energy moved through. The surface took a form. The form advanced. This is what the ocean does with what arrives at its surface. It passes the form forward without passing itself forward. Each water particle, as the shape passes overhead, traces a small circle, rising as the crest approaches, moving forward at the peak, falling as the crest passes, moving back as the trough follows, returning to the place it began. The particle describes a circle and comes home. The shape has moved the length of that circle's diameter and is already calling the next particle into the same motion. What travels is not the water. The water at the crest returns. The form advances. What advances is not a piece of the ocean. It is the requirement that the water ahead take the same form, briefly, and in taking it, passes the same requirement into the water beyond. What is the boundary between the wave and the ocean? Not a surface, not a wall, not a place where one substance ends and another begins. The water in the wave is the same water as the ocean. The molecules at the crest are the same molecules that were at the level surface before the shape arrived and will be at the level surface again after the shape passes. Nothing has been added. Nothing has been removed. The boundary is the shape itself. The shape is a description of what the water is doing at a particular moment. Rising here, falling there. The surface arranged by the energy passing through it into a form that has a crest and a trough and a forward motion. The boundary between wave and ocean is the edge of this description. Where the description applies, there is a wave. Where it no longer applies, there is ocean. The water is continuous throughout. Where the wave ends is not a location. It is a condition, the point at which the water's participation in the form falls below what the form requires. Approached from inside the wave, the boundary is where the surface is still rising. Approached from outside, it is where the surface has returned to level. Between these two approaches, no sharp edge. The wave does not end at a line. It ends the way a sound ends in open air, at the point where what remains falls below what can be distinguished from the surface's own baseline motion. The boundary is real. The line the boundary was thought to occupy is not there. A self may appear at this kind of boundary, not where one substance ends and another begins, where a form has made itself visible at the surface of something continuous. The edge is real. The water inside it and the water outside it have not separated. Breath enters. Breath leaves. Between breaths, the air holds its density. The shape arrived at this location from elsewhere, not the water. The energy that the water is currently shaped around entered this body of ocean at another location. Wind acting on the surface at distance, the friction of moving air against the water's surface layer, that friction becoming motion in the water, that motion propagating outward in all directions at the rate the ocean's depth and density allow. The wind that made this shape has long since moved on. The air pressure that drove the wind came from a temperature difference between two regions of ocean surface, one having received more of the sun's heat, one less, the uneven warming setting the air in motion from one toward the other. The sun that produced that difference has not been in this sky for hours. The shape crossing this water tonight carries a history that extends back through wind, through air pressure, through uneven heat, to a solar event that preceded this night by half a rotation of the Earth. The water here has never left. At any point on the surface where the shape has not yet arrived, the water is at its level. As the shape arrives, that water rises into the form, traces the circle, and returns. The shape continues. The water that participated for a moment no longer participates. Different water is in the shape now. The water ahead, rising into the form the arriving energy produces. Each portion of water participates, then returns. The shape recruits the next and the next. Not because the water is being carried forward, but because the arriving energy requires that the water at each location take that form briefly and release it as the energy passes. What the energy passes forward is not water, but the requirement, the precise form the next water will be asked to hold before it too is released. What moves is an arrangement's capacity to reproduce itself in the water ahead. There is a second shape behind the first, and behind that others. The surface at this hour is not one wave, but a field of overlapping forms, each the result of a different energy input at a different location and a different time, each advancing at the rate its own size determines, each passing through the same water the others are using. The water at any point rises and falls in response to the sum of all the shapes currently passing through it. Where two shapes arrive at the same point at the same moment, the water rises to what both crests require. The water does not distinguish the source of what arrives. It responds to the total of what is present. The result belongs to neither shape independently. It lasts only as long as the two shapes remain at the same location, separating into its components as they continue at their different rates. Where two shapes arrive at the same point in opposite configurations, one at its crest as the other reaches its trough, the surface holds level. The rising required by one is met exactly by the falling required by the other. The water appears still. The energy is still there. Both shapes are still passing through. Neither has been absorbed. Neither has stopped. The apparent stillness is not the absence of motion. It is two motions, exact and opposite, at the same location at the same moment. A moment later, the shapes have moved past each other, each continuing at its own rate through the same continuous water, each emerging on the far side unchanged. The stillness was not absence. It was two presences at the same location at the same moment, neither meeting the other as a separate thing meets a separate thing. Each passed through, each continued. The water returned to what it was. Breath enters, breath leaves. Between breaths, the air holds its density. Below the surface, the water participates in each passing shape to a depth the shape's own size allows. The motion becomes smaller as it descends. The circle each water particle traces as the shape passes overhead, becoming smaller with depth. The radius narrowing again. Until at sufficient depth, the passage of the surface shape produces no motion that can be distinguished from the water's own baseline. The deep water holds what the deep water holds. Its temperature, stable across seasons in a way the surface cannot be. Its pressure, the weight of all the water above it maintained at each depth. Its slow, large-scale currents, moving on scales of months and years, indifferent to the shapes crossing the surface far above. The shapes above do not reach the deep water, the same water, different depths, different relationships to what is passing through. At the surface, the water is in the shape. The circle is at its widest. The participation is complete. Deeper, the circle is smaller. The participation partial. At sufficient depth, the shape is not present. The transition is not a boundary. It is a gradient, the participation becoming smaller continuously. The shape fading into the water rather than ending at a line. The wave is fullest where the water is closest to the surface. The wave diminishes as the water deepens. The water is continuous in both directions. The shape will continue across this water until the water takes what the water takes from any motion passing through it. The organized motion becomes smaller over distance. The crest lowers. The trough rises. The circle each particle traces becomes smaller. The edge of the description approaches the point where the water's participation falls below what a visible form requires. This will happen at the rate it happens, not faster because nothing is watching, not slower because something is. The shape will not decide to stop. It will reach the point where what remains can no longer arrange the surface. The motion that was form will have become indistinguishable from the motion that is simply water at this temperature, at this depth, this far from any shore. The description will no longer apply. What traveled was real. Where it went cannot be marked on any surface. The form is real. The thing the form was thought to be is not there. There is no wave crossing this ocean as a separate object. There is the ocean moving in the way the passing energy requires. The wave is the name for this requirement. The name is accurate. What the name implies, an object, bounded, traveling, separable from the water it moves through, is a description the eye produces when it watches the shape advance and concludes that something is advancing with it. The eye is not wrong to see the shape. The shape is there. The shape is the ocean. What the ocean holds tonight is not waves, but conditions. Conditions under which the surface arranges itself into form stable enough to persist across distance, to carry their shape from where energy entered to locations far from that entry, arriving still recognizable as the form they were given, diminished but not dissolved, the energy still organized enough to call the water at each location into the form it requires. The shapes cross each other, add at some points, cancel at others, separate and continue. Each passes through the water the others are using. Each continues at its own rate through the same continuous medium. At the surface, in the dark, a crest rises. The water at the crest was at the level surface a moment ago. A moment from now, it will be at the level surface again. It is at the crest because the energy arriving from below required it to be there. It will return to level when the energy has passed and the next water ahead has taken the form. The crest is here. The water at the crest is passing through. The energy that requires the crest is passing through. What remains after the shape has passed, the water at the level surface, the deep water at its temperature, the field of other forms still crossing, was there before the shape arrived and continues after it has gone. Breath enters, breath leaves. Between breaths, the air holds its density. What the ocean held before the shapes arrived is what the ocean holds after they pass. The water at the surface returns to the level the ocean holds when no form is passing through. The deep water continues at its temperature, at its pressure, in its slow currents. The baseline, the state the ocean returns to as each shape diminishes, wasn't waiting for the shapes to arrive and isn't changed by their having passed. The shape crossed, the ocean held. The crossing did not require the ocean to divide. The form appeared without the water becoming a second thing. Each shape was the ocean for the duration of the crossing. The ocean is not making the waves. The ocean is the waves making themselves through the ocean. The boundary between them is still moving. The archive remains.